Welcome, everybody, and especially welcome Tim back. We did our former podcast. It was going great. We just started gathering momentum, speed, whatever, and then got to cut off because we have certain time limits. But I want to go into your journey of what you're doing with people, leaders, and others to really develop themselves. But before we do that, you mentioned that your book just came out this week on Amazon.
Yeah.
Tell us about the book, because it sounds like you may have some unique things in there, because you're really looking at a group of leaders that are doing things that are very special.
Well, I think for the longest time in my career, I made a big mistake. And that mistake was looking at the research and making the research the hero, when in fact, it's the people who put it into practice that are the heroes. It's kind of like the man in the arena kind of stuff there, where it's the leaders who say, I'm going to dig in with this and apply it every day, that are the ones that are making the biggest difference. So when you mentioned people applying it, but we want to give them access to taking those steps forward. And that's really what the book is about. So the title is The Only Leaders Worth Following. And, when the book was initially written, I had a really, really strong focus on leaders, as you could imagine, a book for leaders. But over time, what I began to realize through some help with some other folks that I was working with is that I had a deep passion for followers too. I, like all of us, I've been a follower at times in different organizations. And I remember those experiences and the power, the unbelievable power that a single leader has to make my life great or really, really difficult is astounding. There's very little else in life that is so poignant as the power that a leader has to influence the quality of our lives. And so this idea that it's not just an opportunity to help give a roadmap for leaders to consider, but also something to leverage for those I just want to make a good choice about who I'm going to follow. And so that's kind of where the title, The Only Leaders Worth Following, came from. So, initially we go through the research that revealed that 3/4 of your effectiveness as a leader comes from who you are, not what you do. And we go through head, heart, and gut. And what's really fun about this, David, is that in the initial chapter of the book, we'll just give the whole book away here. But in the initial chapter of the book, I put 2 leaders up. These are 2 real people that I have personally worked for. And page 1 is about the accomplishments of those leaders, basically what you would see on a resume. Here's the positions they've held. Here's the things that they've done. And one of these leaders is the best leader that I've ever followed. And the other one is at the opposite end of the spectrum. And what we ask people to do is read through this and guess which one it is. And it's a toss-up. It's in the middle. I don't really know. I can't really tell. People are all over the place. And then I provide just a few stories, very short snippets of my experiences with those leaders. And immediately everybody understands who the better leader is. And the point of that is from a gut intuition. Like, you could spend the last 20 years of your life being focused on leadership as I have been, or we can understand that you intuitively understand this right away. And so we work through the experiences that everybody's had. So we have a little chapter that's focused on that. And then we get into the nitty-gritty of the research. And then the rest of the book is about unpacking what does it really mean to be inwardly sound and others focused. Those 2 pieces that leapt out from the research and said, hey, these things are responsible for 77% of leadership. Let's make sure we really understand those things. So that's what the book is about.
So it sounds like you wrote a book that started another book type of thing, because you're going into the other piece here. And as an engineer, it makes sense. You were looking at the numbers. You were like totally enamored with numbers.
That's right. We do have a couple more that we have planned. The experience of writing a book was never something I thought I would ever do. I mean, ever. Like, I think I went into the library twice in college, like the whole time. I didn't have to. So, but we do have a couple more that come in behind this, and someday we'll get started on those as well. So yeah, The Only Leaders Worth Following.
Well, that's great. So let's dive in now to this journey piece that we were getting into. As I recall, you were talking that you like to engage with leaders for as long as 3 to 4 years, because you got so much content to work on. There's like a 90-day time frame that you want to work with each of them on.
Yeah.
And I wanted to dive more deeply into that, because this not only applies to people at the top
Absolutely.
who are really sincerely want to learn, how can I be more effective? I may have 5 years left in my career. I may have 50 years left in my career or something in between. But
Yeah,
this also really applies that if those people want to really be their best, they probably want others in their organization to be their best. And so I want to peel back the onion more and give people detail on what these steps look like and what types of things can happen when they go through this process.
sure. Well, we mentioned it briefly last time, and we'll spend a lot more time on it this time. Just three core components of really working on who you are, and one of the words that we focus in on is this idea of becoming. It's different than building a skill. It's different than picking up knowledge. We are literally, boldly, some people would say this is a crazy idea. We are working on becoming a more well-developed person. That is the point of this journey, as far as leadership development goes. And because that's perhaps a little bold and crazy by some people's measure, it requires some things that learning a new skill doesn't require. And those three things that we're really focused on are depth, community, and time. And we try to ground all of the development work that we do in those three ideas. But that's not to say that any person who's listening couldn't take these three ideas and go and do it on their own as well. But depth, community, and time are the three core components that we think are absolutely essential to go on a truly effective leadership development journey.
So, what's depth?
Depth is fighting the current trend in our society across the world. And to a certain extent, look, we're all guilty of it to a certain extent. We read a headline and we think we understand what's going on. Or I see a tweet and I'm like, oh, I know what that's about. And the truth is, while I know we can tweet and tweet, to go back to an old phrase, when it was limited, life is more complicated than 140 characters. And we have to be able to go below the surface. In the developmental process, and this is the part that can be a little bit scary for folks, is you've got to look below the actions. There are so many different things that we can attribute to motive and perspective. And this is the challenge. When you go on one of these journeys with yourself and with others, you have to be willing to pick up the rock and look underneath even your own actions and be really honest with yourself. And this is the scary part. I'm going to look in the mirror and say, what was my motive? What was my intent? And do my very best not to lie to myself in order to make it better than it was. I was just in a meeting a few days ago where one of the folks was absolutely silent. And when you think about that, you're like, well, what? Especially it was somebody who normally shares quite a bit. I'm like, wow, I noticed that. So I got in contact with the person afterwards and say, hey, I just want to check in. And I had another person in my life who had all kinds of guesses as to what was going on. And when I asked the question, he said this: there was somebody else involved in the meeting who he is close with, and the other person was leading the meeting. And he said, I was intentionally being quiet because I didn't want to step on him. I wanted to give him the space that he needed. And I wanted to step back a little bit. And I also noticed that one of the other folks in the meeting looked like she was running out of steam. And by the time it was time for me to say something, I thought, let's not drag this out longer. I can just hold that for another time. Now, I will tell you, the explanations that I had and my colleague had were nowhere near that. They were like, this is really noble. Here's somebody who's wanting to not steal the leadership spotlight and is paying attention better than I was to the other people that were in the meeting. That's why this normally very verbal person was very quiet. But some of the speculation was maybe he totally disagrees with everything that we're talking about. I mean, there were all kinds of sinister perspectives on what it might have been. That's just a small story outwardly to the kind of work we need to do internally. We need to be honest with ourselves about when our ego is taking over, when our greed is stepping up and running the show, when our insecurities are asking people to run around and do things that frankly aren't necessary for the organization. They're just necessary for me to feel good about myself. What we mean by depth is picking up those rocks, looking in the mirror, being open to the fact that, hey, look, we're all human. We all have motives that are not the purest at times. We all have perspectives that are not the healthiest. Am I willing to go deeper and look at what's driving some of my choices and who I am as a person? So that's what the depth part is really all about.
It's interesting, or just mistaken, like you indicated. It may not be an ego issue or whatever. The other thing, the bigger thing that strikes me is that when you said depth, I thought, oh, depth of information. And really, you're not talking so much external data. You're talking about depth of understanding yourself
Yeah.
and what's driving you. And once you understand that, then you can better connect with and support and work with others.
Yeah, we do work around the idea of being attentive, for example. And when we talk about being attentive, we talk about being fully present to and fully engaged with others in every interaction. Now, that's not a super complicated definition. That's not going to set the world on fire. But it is so quick and easy to say, okay, yeah, I pretty much do that, until you put it in front of your face every day for 90 days. And you're like, oh my goodness, how many times? I mean, actually, it usually switches. They're like, at first, yeah, I pretty much do that. Second, actually, the truth is I pretty much don't do that. I'm not, most of the time, I'm not fully present to or fully engaged with others in every interaction. And so that's the depth that we're talking about. Not just like this cursory gloss over a few words. And yeah, that sounds good. And I'm probably doing that. No, really, really. Let's take a look and let's do it together, not in a condemning way. And by the way, when you look deeply, you're going to find great things too. It's not all bad news. You're going to find some stuff where you're like, hey, when it comes to being empathic, I kind of knock it out of the park. That's just a very natural part of myself that I've developed already. Or you might find the opposite. But I'm just saying the story's not always bad, but we always have to look deep.
I think the accountability piece is really important to understand too. So when you're talking about the accountability now, I've had a limited number of people in my life who have been very tough accountability wise, basically verbally abusive accountability wise.
Crossing over there, yeah.
Yeah. So it's very important as you get to know yourself that you understand when you're crossing that line. I have someone who I work with right now who will bring up mistakes that I make, but does it in such a nice way,
Yeah.
a graceful way, that I'm totally fine with it. Because my drive is I just want to find the best way to do something, including the best way for me to be me. So I welcome the input. And it's because it's presented so respectfully,
Yes.
so kindly.
Yes.
Kindly is not a word.
Why not? Let's make it work. Let's go with it.
Make it a word.
Yeah.
But when you've got this team, and you mentioned a team of 4, so
yes.
that reminds me of U.S. military. Their conclusion was teams of 4 are most effective, and that's decades ago. So it sounds like that's really a good environment, a healthy environment. Do you find that do you require a lot of times when you're doing those types of accountability teams, that there's a requirement that what's discussed in the team is confidential?
Yeah, actually, it's exactly what we do. So we help form these groups of 4, as you mentioned, and they are what we call a small group, and they travel together during these leadership development journeys that we do. But I'm not involved in those groups unless they invite me to be, because we want to create a sacred space for that group. They don't always need the guy up front involved in their conversation. Now, occasionally they say, hey, we want you to weigh in on this. We want your perspective on this, or they choose to copy us in. So in many cases, we create a space that's just their own. Now, we could also do that by having our staff involved, where it's just the 5 of us, it's the 4 of you and the guide that's working with our organization. And we have some models where we do that as well. But the general idea that this is, what's said here, what we're working on here stays here, is certainly an envelope of safety that we want to create. To this point, we've not had anybody violate that in a meaningful way.
Interesting.
I hope that 10 years from now, I can tell you the same. We've been at this for about 5 years now. And so, at some point, perhaps somebody will make a bad choice there. But even when working, imagine an executive team of 12 and you've got 3 small groups of 4, and there's be possibilities. But what happens in that space as well, and this is very unintentional, we were just focused on individual leadership maximization. But what's happened as we go on these journeys is that leadership teams are becoming more closely connected to one another. And I look back on it now and I'm like, well, go figure. Over a long period of time, we're talking about personal development that's at a meaningful level. Oh, look, they're more connected. And we also don't create this. We in the work that we do, we mix up the group. So after a year, we switch them up so that we don't foster cliques within executive teams. But the accountability piece is important. The safety piece, you must have seen the article about psychological safety. Like that's very important in the midst of development. You have to be able to acknowledge when we're not doing it well. Otherwise, it's going to be fake and it's not going to be real. Another part that I would encourage everybody to think about, especially if you're like me, if you're a recovering perfectionist or a recovering perfectionist, one of those two things. And these ideas are not unique to me, although I couldn't tell you exactly where I've heard them in the past. But two things: progress, not perfection. I mean, and awareness is progress. That's the thing that I have to remind people a lot. You might be not as curious or humble or as empathic as you feel like you could be that would make you a more effective leader. But notice that you're now noticing that. You weren't noticing that about yourself 3 months ago or 6 months ago or a year ago. You're noticing it. And I've not really experienced that people look at that, understand the research, want to grow, and then say, you know what, I'm just going to hang out in awareness and not take any steps forward. I don't see people doing that very often. So progress, not perfection, and awareness is progress.
I'm reminded of some of the things we teach with our assessments. It seems like I don't want to make an assumption, but when you teach these groups, get these people together, one of the things you probably explain to them is, I want you to go into this with an expectation. These other people are different than you.
Yeah.
And they may have some habits or communication behaviors, whatever, that may even be irritating to you. High D, like myself, wants to move fast. High S wants to move slow, whatever it is. Or a high D wants summary, and, the high C wants lots of data.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to go into this meeting expecting that and learning to respect it, because that'll actually make you stronger to understand that.
Yeah, when we talk about kind of personality style, one of the things that as we're working on who you are, we're not working to change personality. So in other words, a high D can be inwardly sound and others focused, just like a high C can be inwardly sound and others focused. Now, the nuances of how they play those things out are going to look differently, but the concept of being an inwardly sound and others focused leader, those ideas, they play out differently, but the concepts are no different. And so in that regard, I feel like most people have kind of a healthy understanding that we're not trying to stamp out, like, you're not going through a leadership machine and you pop out and everybody looks the same. We don't want that at all. We want those qualities to be there, and we want them to manifest uniquely in how God created you.
Yeah. And I like the way that in the group, you're building safety, you're building trust. And so that's very powerful that people can feel that way. Have you ever had a situation, now it sounds like you haven't had anything blow apart, but where you had 4 get together and one person could not adjust their behaviors? They were too skeptical, they were too negative, or maybe it just came out through this process. They weren't, their behaviors, their values, who they are was actually in conflict with the organization's values. And that became more apparent through this process.
Yeah, we have had that situation. Now, we haven't had these specific, we started on the leadership development journey and therefore you're no longer with the company. We haven't had it happen as explicitly as that. But when you dive into these things, some things do become apparent. And so then the leaders of the organization, they have to decide, are we going to deal with this? Are we not going to deal with this? Are we going to make the organization better by shifting the makeup of our executive team? Because here's the thing: if we agree with what this research says, that being inwardly sound and others focused is responsible for 3/4 of your effectiveness as a leader, and we've got somebody on the team who says, I don't buy into that. Well, if as an organization you said, we're going this way in order to be effective leaders, and you say, I don't agree with that, like, it's a pretty simple choice at that point.
Yeah.
Are you going to help them move on to another organization that can align with them values wise, which is a nice way of saying, are you going to let them go? Or do you just let that fester and everybody gets to feel the inefficiency that happens in that? It could be true about leadership. It could be true about other cultural values as well. Do you just let that go or do you address it? And the hardest time to address it, we've heard this story before, probably in many places, is when that person is, relatively speaking, looks like they're a very smart, capable person. But they don't align with the culture or the leadership values of the organization. And those are the hard ones. But if you want to take the whole organization in a direction, you have to deal with those things.
And not only that, it's the best for that person.
It
If you
is
need to
long
part
term.
company, because they're not going to be happy, they're not going to
No,
be fulfilled.
no,
It's not
you're right.
working for them. So to empathetically help them move on
And that last
is a
part's
really
really
good thing to
important
do.
too. And can you really help? Or is it like, you're done, good luck? Or, you know what, I don't want this to be super bad for you. What can we do? What can we do as an organization to help you land soft and get to the next thing that's going to be good for you? I think that's important.
If I'm remembering correctly, you're saying we've got to have depth, we got to have community, and then the third piece is time.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
we have these micro attention spans today, and you want time, and I'm getting the impression you're not talking 17 seconds. So
No, you're
talk to me
right.
about the time.
Yeah. So we mentioned this as a little bit in the last podcast. We'll go into a little more here. We like to do 90 days on a particular topic because we want people to have time to look at the world through that issue that we are wrestling with. So if we're talking about what does it mean, for example, in Inwardly Sound, we talk about what does it mean to be a principled leader. And this is one of those places where it's so easy to say, oh yeah, I got that box checked. But again, back to the depth part, if I really go in and look at what does it mean to be courageous? What does it mean? What does it really mean to be honest? I mean, really, really, not like the nice, oh yeah, I didn't lie my face off. But what does it really mean to be honest? What does it mean to be authentic? What does it mean to have integrity? And what does it mean to have grit? To spend 90 days looking at my leadership life through the lens of where could I be more principled? And this gets back to the bigger idea of what we're trying to help people understand, which is to say, it's not a bad thing to say, how do I build trust with the people that I'm leading? But we believe that it's a far better thing to say, how can I be trustworthy? And that's really what we're working on here. And so if we're going to graduate the conversation to how can I become, like literally as a human being, 90 days is not a long period of time to focus on something that's going to help us become more trustworthy. And so we want people to experience a variety of circumstances as a leader. And the best way we see to do that is to take a 90-day bite at these things and not speed through them. Now, occasionally, do we do things a little? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It's very interesting, the slight nuance of those two phrases. But when you talk about how can I be more trustworthy, I'm focused on improving myself.
Yes.
When I say how can I build trust with this team, I'm focused on them.
Yeah.
And that's going to divert me to, what their particular nuances are. And it kind of takes away from my self-development focus,
It can. I mean, I tell people, hey, look, I love a good whitewater rafting trip like the next person. Like, let's go do that. Let's go have that fun. But that's not going to take the place of me saying, gosh, if I were on the other side of me right now, what would be the trustworthy thing I need to do with my communication? How thorough and thoughtful do I need to be? Just for example, how principled do I need to be trustworthy? And so it shifts the conversation in a way I think that's healthy for all of us to consider.
Yeah, interesting. Now, you say 90 days
Yeah.
per component or whatever term you
Yeah.
use.
No, that's good. Yeah.
All right. How many of those are there?
Well, we have 11 and then really sound others focus. And we also have an additional 2 that we do around the issue of worldview. And so 13 in all. If we do the whole run with the group, it's 4 years. So it's like getting another degree in that regard. And it's a.
But stay with that for a moment. Stay with that. I'm interrupting, but stay with that for a moment. Think if our colleges did this. 4
That
years.
would be,
Think now you can get
yes.
your engineering, you can do all your math and your physics and do whatever you want, or you can do this, or you can do that. But think if part of the required curriculum was over 4 years,
Yeah.
we're going to teach you how to understand yourself and and I'm adding in how to discern truth, one of my
Yeah.
favorites. We'd have a totally different country.
I believe that we would, and I don't, I'm not trying to put the work that we do at the center of that. I'm just saying it would be great if we had a focused perspective that was required as part of the educational system to say, I'm going to be a more well-developed human being at the end of this. I'm not just going to be with somebody with knowledge, and I'm not just going to be somebody with skills. And I'm not down on knowledge and skills. It's an and thing.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
I'm learning my engineering and I'm learning how to be attentive. I'm learning my engineering and I'm learning how to be humble, which, I say that because I think I've probably got some criticism in my life. Like that wasn't the most humble thing I've ever heard from you, Tim. So, and to that I say, fair enough. Fair enough. I need to work on these things as well. So it would be incredible. We would be producing people who are far more ready to lead effectively if they came out of our schools as inwardly sound and others focused people.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not saying that because it sounds nice. I'm saying that because that's what the data says.
Yeah. Well, you're an engineer. That's why.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I am. In that regard, I very much am. That's true.
Okay, well, let's wrap this up. I think we've given people more meat on this journey piece. Once again, any closing thoughts, and then remind people where they can go to learn more about you and the work you're doing.
Yeah. As far as a closing thought, I think that I would encourage people as they think about their own leadership development to just ask themselves this question: how much of what I'm doing to become a better leader has to do with me becoming a more well-developed human being? Because the research suggests that 3/4 of your investment of time, energy, and money, whether you're talking about an individual or an organization, should be on who you are, on working on those two big ideas of being inwardly sound and others focused. And if we're not doing those things, then I'll go back to my engineering, then we're being inefficient. We're being inefficient in our investment of dollars, time, and energy if we're not having our ratio that same way. So I just encourage people to look back and say, well, first of all, I encourage you to have a leadership development plan for yourself. Your organization may not do that for you, but if they don't, you can't throw your hands up. You got to take responsibility for that. So I believe everybody that wants to lead well, you need to have that. But in addition, as you do that, where is becoming a more inwardly sound and others focused in that person in that plan? Because that's going to get you and the people who follow you the best bang for your buck and for your energy and for your time. So I encourage
Great
that.
advice.
The place where you can find us to learn a little bit more about what we do, or just learn more about these concepts. You don't have to buy a thing from us, but come check out. We've got a discussion guide that goes along with the book. That if you want to be a part of our email list, and that is theonlyleaders.com.
Cool. Well, Tim, thank you so much for these two podcasts. I think this has been great. A lot of good information for people. Hope they check out your book, learn more about you on your website, and I hope our paths cross again.
Absolutely, Dave. Thanks for. One of my great joys in life is getting to share this message with people. So thanks for creating an opportunity and a venue to do that.